In this video, I will show you a few of the construction steps for the CKC Newton's sundress pattern. So I'm going to go over the placement of the waist gathering and how to mark that, how to prepare the bindings, how to add the pockets. I will show you how to enclose the seam where the skirt attaches to the bodice. And last, I will show how to put the elastic into the waist. So let's get started with our skirt. Okay, so I'm starting with my skirt front rectangle. Here's the top, and this is the length, and I have it folded in half right now. First, I'm going to take my armhole template. I'm going to line up the top of the template with the top of the skirt and the side of the template with the side seams. Have that on the corner, and I'm going to cut around it to remove the armhole. Next, if you're adding pockets, you'll need to measure down from the arm side the amount shown in the pattern directions. You can use your cutting mat or you can use a ruler. So we're measuring down from the bottom of the armhole. Then we'll place the template there and then we'll cut around it. It's very important that you only do this on the front. I was in a rush making one and I did it on the back too and had an unplanned design element on that one. Next, we're going to mark the placement of the waist gathering. So for this particular garment, I'm using elastic, so I'm marking on the wrong side. If you're using shirring, then you're going to mark on the right side. So measure down from the arm side the amount shown in the pattern directions. And for the front, we're going to measure down another inch so that our line is gently curved. And then in the pattern directions, it tells you how far down to measure depending on your cup size. You may need to measure a little bit farther down. So just refer to the chart in the pattern. Then we're going to draw a line that's relatively straight near the center and then starts to gently curve towards the side seams. So if you have a curved ruler, this is a good place to use it. If you don't, it's fine. It doesn't have to be perfect. You just want a gentle curve towards that mark that you made by the side seam. If you're marking on the right side of your fabric, make sure you have an erasable or a washable marker. Then you're going to flip it over and do the exact same thing on the other side. Now, if you're making the kid sizes, you don't need to curve that line on the front. You can just go straight across. And then for kid sizes or adult sizes on the back, you're going to mark your line just straight across like it's shown here. When you're doing the back, you're just going to stack your back pieces right sides together, cut out the armhole the same way, and mark straight across like it's shown. Next, we'll talk about the pockets. I've finished the curved edge with my serger, and just to help me fold the edge in, I'm going to slightly gather it by pulling on the threads that were the needles. You can also increase the differential feed on your serger, or if you don't have a serger, you can do a basting stitch 1/4 inch from the edge and gather that. And you see how the fabric wants to curve now that it's gathered? It just makes it a little bit easier. So now I'm folding the edge 1/4 inch towards the right side. And then once we go to sew this onto our skirt, that edge is going to be sandwiched in between the pocket and the skirt. So I'm pressing that down, and then I'm going to repeat this on the other pocket. And then I'll set those aside until we're ready to attach them to the skirt. Next, I'll show you how to prepare the bindings if you're not using pre-made bias tape. So we start by folding it in half, matching up the long edges, and then there's a crease in the middle. Then we'll fold the long raw edge on the bottom up to that crease, and then we'll press that down. Then I'll fold the other long raw edge up to the crease and press that. So now I have both long raw edges folded and meeting in the middle. And now I'm going to fold it in half again along the original fold that I made first and press that. So we'll do this for our armhole bindings and our pocket bindings. And now you see if I unfold it, I have 3 creases there. If you have a bias tape maker, then that makes it go a little bit faster. To use these, you just feed the end of the fabric in to the large opening, and then I'm using a pin here to just kind of scoot it out towards the small opening and pull it through. And it got a little bunched up there, but that's okay. You just pull it out till it's not bunched up, and then fold those long raw edges toward the center just like we did before. But this time I'm using the tool to help me, so it goes a little bit faster. So you just slide the bias tape maker along the length of the fabric and press the fabric as it comes out folded. And then if you were making single fold bias tape and using it for an application where you're not actually folding it around the edge of the fabric, you could just stop right here. But since we want this to fold around and enclose a raw edge, we're going to fold it in half and press that. And as you can see, I've got a long piece here. I think that's actually easier to just cut a whole long piece, the length of all of your bindings put together, if you have the fabric for it, and then you can cut it to size. Now you can also use store-bought bias tape. See, when you unfold it, it looks just the same. And you can buy different widths of bias tape, just depending on the look you want. If you want a really skinny binding, you could even use something like this single fold bias tape here. To prepare to attach the binding, first I'm going to place it on my ironing board with the double fold on the right, and I'm just pressing it into a curve. And this isn't required, but it just makes it more smooth when you put it on, if we convince it that it wants to curve before we start. So I'm just turning it into a C shape as I press it. And you can see now it is almost the exact same shape that we want it to be once it's sewn onto our pocket cutout. Got a nice C shape there. So next I'm going to pin it onto the skirt. Okay, so I need to align the raw edge of the bias binding with the raw edge of the pocket cutout. So I'm just going to pin it in place. I leave a little bit hanging off the edge when I start, and then I'll have a little bit extra that hangs off the edge when I finish, when I get around to the other side. So I'm just going to pin this all along the curve. And then once it's pinned in place, I'm going to sew on that crease that's closest to the raw edge all the way around to attach it. Okay, so I've sewn it on. I'm going to flip it over so I'm looking at the right side of the fabric. I'm going to press the raw edge of the skirt towards the bias tape and then fold the bias tape along that original center crease, and that will sandwich the edge of the pocket cutout inside of the bias tape. And I just need to press it. And since we pressed it already into the C shape, we're not getting any like bubbling or puckering or anything like that that can sometimes happen when you're trying to force a piece of fabric to curve. So now that it's pressed down, we'll just need to sew it to attach it. So I'm just going to sew along that curve 1/8 of an inch away from the fold there to secure it. To attach the pocket, First I pressed the bias tape again after I sewed it, then I laid it on my cutting mat, and I'm using the marks on the cutting mat to find the center of the pocket cutout. And now with my edges folded toward the right side on my pocket, I'm finding the center of the straight edge as well, and that way I can center it perfectly over that cutout. Next, I'll pin the pocket to the skirt. The right side of the pocket is touching the wrong side of the skirt. I'm going to pin and then sew around this curve to attach. And now that that's sewn, I'll flip it over and show you the right side. There's our pocket piece and our finished pocket. Next, you'll repeat for the second pocket. Next, I'll show how to attach the bodice to the skirt and enclose the seam allowance. So I've gathered the top of my skirt and I'm placing the bodice right sides together with the skirt, and I have my lining folded under, and I'm going to move that out of the way. Next, I'm just clipping the main fabric to the skirt fabric. Again, leaving the lining alone. I'm going to make sure my gathers are evenly distributed as I clip. I'll clip the rest of the way across the top. And now that it's all clipped, I'm going to take the back bodice and bring it around to be right sides together with the back skirt. And same thing, we're keeping that folded lining out of the way. And then I'll just clip the skirt to the main bodice fabric, just like on the front. So clip all along on that side and then bring the other side of the back bodice around, keeping the lining out of the way, and clip that in place as well. Then you're going to go to the machine and sew across both sides of the back and across the front. After sewing, I pressed the seam allowance up toward the bodice, and then I pressed the entire bodice again to make sure it's nice and smooth and to make sure my fold is in place nice and neat. Now I'm bringing that folded edge down over the seam allowance, and you can either pin this in place, like I'm doing here, and I like to use a clip at the very end that you can see I already did, or you can use Wonder Tape, which is basically just like double-sided tape that's for fabric. So I just stick some Wonder Tape on the folded edge of the lining there. And I prefer to use a few short pieces instead of using one long piece across the whole bodice. But you'll stick that to the lining and then peel off the backing. And then you can just stick that down over the seam allowance. Just make sure everything is nice and smooth when you do this and you don't have any bubbles or puckers in between the lining and the main fabric there. So move down and continue either pinning or taping all the way across. Then once it's pinned or taped in place, you'll turn the dress right side out and sew from the right side all the way across, about 1/8 of an inch away from that seam. And if you pinned it, you'll just need to be careful to remove the pins from the back as you're sewing. Then you can top stitch around the armholes and the neckline as well at this point. Now to mark where the waist gathering is, I've tried on the dress and I'm going to mark with a washable pen. Now if I was doing shirring, I would do it like this with the right side out. For elastic, I would need to do this inside out. But I'm just marking where that belt is, and it's going to end up as a dotted line because the fabric is kind of gathered up, and that's fine. Just mark all along. Or you could always just wear it with a belt and have the option to wear it loose like this too if you don't want elastic. Now for my elastic, I've sewn it into a loop by overlapping the ends, and now I'm dividing it into quarters. And I'm just using clips. You could always use a pen, you could draw on it with a Sharpie. Just divide it into quarters. And now I'm going to slide it around my dress, which is wrong side out. And those quarter marks that I marked on the elastic, I'm going to place onto the dress at quarter points. So the first place I'm going to pin is at the center back. The next clip on my elastic I'm going to pin to the side seam. I'm going to move over to the other side seam. Now with the side seams, you want to make sure that seam allowance is pressed towards the back. And then flipping it over to the front, we'll find the center front and pin the center of the elastic to the center front of the skirt. Now you can add more pins in between those if you want to. Just stretch out the elastic until the fabric underneath is flat. And then you can place another pin. So you can continue to pin in between each of your previous pins if you want to, just stretching like this. Now to sew the elastic onto the wrong side of the skirt, I'm just going to set my machine with a wide zigzag stitch. And then just sew a couple of stitches to get it started. Now I'm going to grab the next pin down the line and pull and stretch that elastic until the fabric underneath is pretty much flat. And then I'm lining up the elastic so that it's covering up that dotted line I made for the placement of the elastic. So you'll need to pull from behind the needle and in front of the needle to stretch that elastic out as you sew. And you just sew all the way around with that zigzag stitch. I'm sorry, the sewing machine was vibrating my phone, so it's a little blurry there. But once you get to the next pin, you can just take it out and then move down and find the next spot that you pinned. Stretch it out again. Make sure your seam allowance is pointing towards the back still. And then stretch the elastic from in front and from behind the needle and continue sewing. And just take your time, make sure that elastic is covering the dotted line the whole time, and continue sewing all the way around until you get back to where you started. And here is the finished dress. I hope this video was helpful, but if you have any more questions or just want to show off your creations, head over to our Facebook group that is linked at the end of the pattern instructions. Thanks for watching.